I am so excited today to be bringing you this video. I am going to show you how to make this delicious, beautiful sourdough bread in the bread machine. I have a loaf here that we've been eating on that I wanted to show you. Now this loaf is probably 3 or 4 days old. There's not much left. We've been cutting on it, but it's soft. Look how soft and beautiful. It smells delicious. It's got the texture just like normal sandwich bread does. Let me slice off a piece here so you can see just how soft that it really is. Isn't that just beautiful? Just look at this texture. It makes wonderful sandwiches, and most people wouldn't even know that it's made with sourdough and not yeast, because it tastes and feels and looks just like normal yeasted bread. But it's not made with commercial yeast, it's made with sourdough. Remember, you can always find the recipes to my videos in the description box below, and you don't have to write down everything that I tell you, because it is in the description box, the ingredients on how to make this bread. And if you don't have a sourdough starter, there are videos out there that will show you how to make a starter. Some of them overcomplicate it so much, and I am working on a video of how to make a sourdough starter, and you might see my little jar of starter over here that I'm videoing as I make the starter come to life, and I hope to have that out to you soon. Those kinds of videos are a little more difficult to make because you have to record a little bit every day. But I am working on one so that you can have a wonderful sourdough starter yourself if you can't find a friend or someone who can give you a starter. But there is no need to pay for expensive starters. You can make one yourself out of flour and water. I don't recommend paying large amounts of money for a starter that someone says, oh, this starter is 100 years old and all of this, because when you bring that starter home, after you start to use and feed that starter, it will become your own, and it takes on the yeast that is in the air in your own home. So even if it did come from Sweden or wherever, it's not going to be the same once you get it in your home and begin using it. So I can't see paying $30, $40 plus for a starter that is, it just doesn't work that way. That's not how sourdough starters work. They take yeast from the air. That's how they get, it's wild yeast, and although it may have been started in another country or in some wonderful place like San Francisco sourdough, it is going to change once you start using it at your house, because the yeast in the air is different at your house. Because I want you to be successful in making sourdough bread. I want to share a little story. When I first started wanting to make sourdough bread, I think I may have bought a starter. I can't remember for sure, but I believe I bought a starter. I didn't know anybody that had one, and I didn't know enough to make my own. But I started making sourdough, and I was doing it the artesian way, you know, the part. I'm sure if you've watched any videos on sourdough bread, you've seen the ones where, you know, you mix your water and your flour and your starter together and salt, and then you stretch and fold, and then you stretch and fold, and you knead and you stretch and you fold, and it's an all-day ordeal. I tried doing that, and it was very laborious. It was not fun at all. I mean, you pretty much can't do anything else that day except tend to your dough, and you're all this stretching and folding and this stretching and folding and this stretching and folding and checking for the window pane. And my first loaf was horrible. It just turned out horrible. All of that work, hours and hours of work, and it just turned out terrible, not even edible. But I have made artesian loaves of sourdough, and I'll show you a picture of some of my wonderfully successful bread. And I did not do all that stretching and folding and kneading in order to accomplish that. And hopefully one day I can make a video on that. If you want to make artesian sourdough bread without the bread machine, I can show you how I did that. But today this video is about making the bread in your bread machine. It keeps very well. Sourdough bread keeps better than yeasted bread because it just has these natural, I guess the natural yeast that's in it, it fights off things that would cause bread to go stale and old and mold. So sourdough bread is just wonderful. About my starter, let me get my starter. I have my starter here in the oven. The oven is not on. I just had the oven, you know, just warmed up so that my starter would be warm. Now when I fed this starter this morning, the starter was at this level right here. And just in about an hour in a warm place, it has already risen up to here. So see how airy and bubbly that is? This is a very happy, active starter. And it should just be like a, you know, like a hot marshmallow on the inside, you know, just soft. And that's what you want in your starter. But it smells so good. It's a good smell. It's a fermenting smell. I'm not sure how to describe it. I guess you can smell a little bit of the alcohol that is created. Not the kind of alcohol, it's not going to make you drunk or anything like that, but normal fermentation creates alcohol gases. And so you can smell that fruity smell. It just smells so good. Now my starter is about the consistency of a thin pancake mix. It's not real thick and it's not super thin. And some people say you want it to be fed. Some people say unfed. Well, what I do is I feed mine the day I'm going to make my bread. Start making my bread, is I feed my starter and I put it in a warm place because I want to make sure that it's alive, happy, and active. So I guess you still consider it fed after it has risen. I'm not sure what all the rules are on that, but I just want to make sure, it's kind of like proofing your yeast, right? I want to make sure that my starter is very active. Now, you wouldn't want to feed it and immediately make your bread. I think that would probably slow down the whole process. So you probably want it to be a little hungry, right? Because you want it to do its work in the loaf, not so much in the jar. But you just want a really good active starter. And I would not fret so much about, is it not fed? Is it cold? Is it warm? Did I just take it out of the refrigerator? It's still gonna work. It just might take the bread longer to rise, and you just have to be patient. But if there is nothing wrong with your starter, if it's healthy and it's active and it's working, then don't fret about any of that. You have a good healthy starter, then use it in this recipe to make your bread, and be patient if it takes longer. So I have most of my ingredients measured out to make this easy. The first thing you want to do is make sure you put your paddle in your bread machine. And sometimes I spray the stem with a little oil to make sure it's easy to remove. And I have 1 cup of whole milk here, and it is body temperature warm. So you want to make sure your milk is warm, and we're going to go ahead and pour in our milk. And I have 1/4 of a cup of oil. Yes, you can use butter, whatever kind of oil or fat you want to use. And I have 1/4 of a cup of sugar. You can use honey if you would rather use honey. And I'm going to mix this together just a little bit. Now we need a 1/2 cup of active starter. So here I have my starter. Hopefully you can see how nice and bubbly that is. It's nice and bubbly, very active. And we're going to measure out a 1/2 cup. hopefully you can see how the consistency of my starter as I pour it in here. So just pour that in. See, it's kind of liquidy, not a little thinner than you would make pancake mix if you were making pancakes. Now, because we are using sourdough starter, the flour amount is going to be a little more harder to estimate. I usually work out just fine with the consistency of my starter when I use 3 cups of bread flour. But if your starter is thicker or thinner, then you may find that you need more or less flour. And here I have 3 cups of bread flour, and I do use a high gluten bread flour. And just spreading that out on top. And I have 1 tablespoon of Himalayan pink salt. You can use any kind of salt. And I just kind of mix it around a little bit on top. Now I'm going to set this into my bread machine, and I'm going to put it on the mix function, and I'll show you that. So I brought the bread machine over here on the counter so you can see. I am going to lock in my bread pan, and I am going to, my bread machine, the number 11 is raw dough, and so I'm going to go to function number 11, and it defaults to 23 minutes. So if I use function number 11, then for 23 minutes it will knead my dough. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm on the raw dough, it's set for 23 minutes, and hit start. I always encourage you to go ahead and look in your machine when it starts mixing. Have yourself a spatula nearby so you can determine if you need to add more flour or more liquid. So we're going to let this beat for a few minutes, and we will know in just a moment if we need to add flour or liquid. Hopefully we won't have to add either. So it's coming together very nicely. So I just wanted to show you this. My dough ball is a little dry, just barely a little. So I am going to add about a tablespoon of milk. And let that beat in. It'll take it a minute, but it will incorporate it. So after a couple of minutes of kneading, you can see the dough ball has incorporated that milk. And the longer it kneads, the smoother it will get. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this knead for the full 23 minutes. And then what I'm going to do is wait for about an hour. You can actually wait an hour, hour and a half, however long you want to wait. And then I am going to reset it to the raw dough setting for another 23 minutes and let it knead. So we're going to do 2 cycles of the raw dough kneading, and we're going to leave about an hour or an hour and a half in between the 2 kneadings. So it's actually been about 3 hours since we did our first cycle, kneading cycle, and there's what our dough looks like. And I am going to set the machine to do another kneading cycle. Our second kneading cycle has completed, so what we're going to do is we're going to take out the beater out of the bread pan, because we won't be needing that anymore. And if you can't get your beater out of your bread pan for whatever reason, that's okay. This is just to keep there from being a big hole. Now I have a little oil here. You just need a little bit. I'm going to pour it over the dough ball, put a little on my hand, and I'm just going to pick the dough ball up and kind of shape it into a little round, tight ball, and try to get it smooth on top. and I want to make sure it's covered in oil. This will keep it from drying out. And then just place it back into the pan. Make sure it has oil all on the top. So here's what it looks like in our bread pan. And what we're going to do is we're going to close the lid, and we are going to let this sit overnight. And in the morning, it should be raised all the way up to the top of the pan, and we will bake it. So I'll bring you back in the morning and show you. Don't forget, if you like these videos, to hit the like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my other videos. Okay, so our dough has been rising. This dough has actually been rising for 24 hours. I have had it to rise enough just overnight, and it really depends on the temperature. Warmth is the friend of yeast, and it's been kind of cool, so it has taken longer. So just be patient when you're working with sourdough. You have to give it much time that it needs. So it is risen enough, and I am going to set my machine to the bake cycle, which is 14 on this KBS, and I'm going to set it for 45 minutes. So there's 45 minutes. Going to close the lid. Oops, close the lid. And I have to hit start twice, and bake will start flashing, and that's how I know it is baking. So in 45 minutes, I will have bread. So once you have allowed your bread to cool, you don't want to cut hot bread because that will cause it to get doughy and cause it to go stale and kind of go flat. So don't cut your bread while it's hot. Wait until it is cool before you cut it. And we're going to cut this loaf. This is a bread slicer that I'm using. I'm using an electric knife. In the description below, you'll find a link to my Amazon shop page where you can find all of the things that that I use. You can't find this bread slicer because it's really old, but there are bread slicers out there. And what this is just a guide to help you get all the slices the same size. So let's slice our bread and see what it looks like on the inside. So we have our bread sliced. We're going to look on the inside. Okay, so we have a hole. That's okay. That happens sometimes, you know, when the yeast rises. But it is so soft. It's got a nice crumb to it. It's the kind of crumb you want in a sandwich bread. It's really beautiful. You want to store your bread in an airtight a bag, and you want it to be as airtight as possible because air is the enemy of bread. And I have these bags here that I bought that fit the loaf nicely. You'll have to have one that the loaf will fit in. I know the 2.5 gallon Ziploc bags will fit, and I bought these at a bulk store, and I love them. They work so good, and they're very thick, and I can even reuse them for bread. So you want to store your bread in an airtight container, preferably a bag that you can get as much of the air out of. Thanks for watching Butterfly Meadows Homestead. Bye-bye.